Some drama for Keemstar, who just lost an important motion in a libel lawsuit filed against him by YouTuber Def Noodles. And that lawsuit, it basically alleges that Keemstar had been saying some very serious things about Def Noodles, that he had libeled him, which is saying something false and sort of defaming him in writing, which was via a tweet. And we'll look at that tweet in a minute. And Def Noodles sued Keemstar for making sort of accusations of grooming young children. And that's what the tweet said about Def Noodles. And a federal judge has just ruled that Def Noodles is not a fictional cat, which is the literal text of what the federal judge said. And so I'm Kevin Nooper. I'm an attorney at Nooper and Covey. I want to walk you all through this lawsuit against Keemstar. It's going to go forward now. Def Noodles is, now that he's been determined not to be a cat, there will be a lawsuit against Keemstar for whether these allegations that were made in the tweet have damaged Def Noodles. And it could be a lot of money because we just saw what happened with Fox News, where it was an $800 million settlement. And having those kind of allegations, if Def Noodles wins the lawsuit, could be a very large amount of damages that could be a lot of trouble for Keemstar. So I'm going to show you the complaint in this lawsuit, what Def Noodles originally said, what is all this drama. It gets into Ethan Klein and his channel as well. And so it's a lot of YouTube stuff that is now being dragged into the courtroom and is getting us sort of this very strange federal judge opinion saying this. Okay, here is the amended complaint in this lawsuit, which means it's the current version of the lawsuit. And this is what sort of kicked all this off. And you can see it was filed in September 2022. The original version was filed in May 2022. And we just now, a couple of weeks ago, got a ruling from the judge about this ruling about whether or not Dennis Feitosa, who is Def Noodles, could be considered someone who could be defamed, or whether he's really a cat. Or rather, really, whether his online persona, Def Noodles, is this cat that thus cannot be defamed because it's not a real person. So it'll get into some interesting legal issues around defamation, and then a whole lot of drama. So Keemstar, he can't complain about that. This was filed in the Western District of New York. You can see Def Noodles' real name, Dennis Feitosa, as the plaintiff, and then Daniel M. Keem, which is Keemstar's real name, and of course where he got Keemstar. And then you can see that this is sort of the intro and the short bullet point summary. This action arises out of defendants' entirely fabricated statements that underage girls accused plaintiff of grooming plaintiff's, quote, victim, which gave the clear implication that plaintiff was engaged in pedophilic activities or was the subject of accusations of engaging in pedophilic grooming. Defendant has since admitted that these were complete fabrications, okay? And so the plaintiff here again is Def Noodles, and so he's saying that Keemstar was making these sort of false accusations, which are obviously very serious accusations. And again, and one thing to note as we're looking throughout this lawsuit and these documents I'm showing you, none of this has been determined to be true by a jury, other than the only thing that's been determined factually is that Def Noodles is not a cat. The actual facts of this will go to the jury. I'm going to show you both parties' version of events that they have, and so it's up to y'all to sort of look at what the evidence is. I'm not, taking a position one way or other on like what actually happened here, but we'll see a lot of screenshots, and so there's a lot of this that you can look at, and each side obviously has very different versions of what happened here. I'm scrolling down through just some legal stuff. This is stuff about the jurisdiction. This is stuff about choice of law is what this is. That's actually a super complex legal issue that I won't get too much into, but anytime you have defendants in different states, and we have like a very complex world now that everybody is talking about each other across the internet, you have to do something called choice of law, which is decide like what state's law governs a lawsuit. So even if it's in New York, it can be governed by California law if the statements are sort of sent over into California. And so he's kind of prepping up to be able to argue this, to basically say, look, apply California law. I think he likes that law because it's a little better for him. This is Def Noodles on defamation. So but you may still have to sue someone in New York, even if the lawsuit's under California law, because there's this concept called personal jurisdiction, which is you can't drag someone from New York off into California unless there's certain levels of connection to the state or whatever. And so you get into a very complex situation where you can be off in one state, defendants are in different states. The law is in a completely different state, and so it just becomes kind of a mush. But here, they're saying it's California. Def Noodles is. So this says that the plaintiff, Def Noodles, is a popular YouTube personality who posts and posted content under the handles Def Noodles. Plaintiff also posts and posted on his Twitter and other social media accounts under similarly titled handles. Despite using the handle Def Noodles, and despite being referred to colloquially as Def Noodles as a nickname for his show titles, persons familiar with plaintiff knew, know, and understand references to Def Noodles as actually and in fact referring to plaintiff Dennis Feitosa. Moreover, on plaintiff's YouTube channel, it clearly states that my name is Dennis Feitosa and Def Noodles is a show I created. Plaintiff's Instagram and Twitter pages link viewers to the YouTube channel. In short, the listening, viewing public do not view Def Noodles as distinct from Dennis Feitosa any more than they view Mr. Beast, the world's leading YouTube personality, as distinct from Jimmy Donaldson, his real name. So this is kind of the core of what this the arguments and the judge's ruling will get into, which is this idea of can you libel someone, can you defame someone or slander someone? Those are all kind of a little bit different things. But can you get sued for something like that if the statement you're making is directed at someone's sort of internet name? Daniel Keem's internet name is Keemstar, but of course, when I say Keemstar, like when you see that on the title, you know who I'm talking about. And I think what Def Noodles is saying is, look, I use the name Def Noodles, but when someone says that, they're not thinking of the fictional character, they're thinking of me. And that's going to be this core issue of like, is the comment directed at me such that people think you're talking about me and not talking about some fake cartoon character? It would be akin to saying like Borat is this dumb guy from Kazakhstan, and then would people think you're talking about Borat, or would they think you're talking about Sacha Baron Cohen? That would be a more extreme example where I think it would be more clear that the person that your comment is sort of not directed at Sacha Baron Cohen personally. When we're talking about internet names, it gets to be a little bit different. And I think that's part of why the judge in this case ruled that even though the comments that you're going to look at about grooming or talking about Def Noodles, it still can be, you can still have a lawsuit for libel. We're going to see a little more about that when we get into the motions. So this says defendant Daniel Keem is a popular YouTube personality, posts content under the name Keemstar. Defendant also posts on his Twitter and other social media accounts, and he's got 2.5 million followers on Twitter. And this says they're direct competitors in the social media influencer industry. The defendant, that's Keemstar, has a history of posting factual claims regarding the entertainment industry in addition to other types of non-factual postings. Factual is just something that's true. Non-factual is something that is sort of people understand is not, you're not claiming it's true. You're just sort of messing around. And here's where Ethan Klein jumps into the picture in this big drama alert that we've got going, which is on March 31st, 2021, after apparently taking issue with a perceived alliance between plaintiff and another social media personality, Ethan Klein, whom defendant was unfriendly with, defendant sent the following direct messages to plaintiff. So they keep using plaintiff defendant, but just so that's saying that Def Noodles and Ethan Klein supposedly had this alliance. What they were allying about, I don't know. And then Keemstar doesn't like Ethan Klein, according to this complaint, and so he gets mad about that and starts sending the messages that we're going to see now. And these are what was said. This is the stuff that starts to get into what Def Noodles is saying is not true. And Keemstar sends him, according to Def Noodles, these messages that says, "You have lost your blanking way and you've lost your blanking mind. The day has come, Dennis, and when it comes, I want you to know it was me. What? No comment? All caps. Why are you working for Ethan and Trisha?" And that's Ethan Klein from this H3H3 channel that probably all y'all know about. And then this looks like more messages from Keemstar that say, "I was blanking pissed at you the other night. I've calmed down yet now. I just watched this Nicholas Diorio video on you. Bro, you are messing up so bad." Then it goes down here. Here's another screenshot where Keemstar saying, "Do you have to be so much more careful? You're going to get blanking sued. I've been sued. It is not fun." Also in the video, there's a tweet where, "Are you trying to try to go after my sponsors? I want a full written apology." And it looks like that is, I'm going to make sure these are all Keemstar, but they do look like from this column and the way this is sorted that they'd usually be on the other side if they were Def Noodles. So this looks like kind of a long rant, and then it says, then this is back to the lawsuits. What it's saying, as is clear from the messages above, defendant threatened Dennis, not a fictional character named Def Noodles, for the postings plaintiff made on his social media. And you can see above, back what we looked at, he's not talking about Def Noodles. He's saying the day has come, Dennis. And then on May 21st, 2021, on his verified Twitter account, defendant made good on his profane threats and posted the following tweet: "Of and concerning plaintiff." That's this Def Noodles. I'm using his handle because I'm this is just sort of what everyone uses to refer to him as, which is part of the problem and part of why I think he won this first part. So Keemstar then sends this tweet. You can see this. This has got a picture of Def Noodles in sort of his character garb that he uses sometimes, which is this sort of white glasses, and you can't see it, but he's got little cat ears on these headphones. And it says, Keemstar is saying, Def Noodles has allegedly groomed girls from ages 12 to 15. Big YouTuber source. Quote, victims are scared of him and wish to stay anonymous, but may come forward soon. Hashtag drama alert. And then he says, Def Noodles has declined to give us a comment on these allegations made against him, which is referring back to these tweets here where it says, after he calls him Dennis, he says, what, no comment, and then starts getting mad about Ethan Klein and doing their bidding in this alliance or whatever. So Def Noodles says, these statements were complete and utter fabrications. There were no allegations by any girls, underage or not, that plaintiff had groomed them or was otherwise engaged in inappropriate conduct of a sexual nature. Moreover, contrary to defendant's false claims, neither defendant nor anyone acting on defendant's behalf made any attempt to seek comment on the fabricated allegations. To the contrary, defendant blocked plaintiff on Twitter, ensuring he would have no ability to publicly respond to defendant's fabricated claims. So he's saying Keemstar sent all this crazy stuff and then blocked me. And then he gets to the reaction, and why he's alleging this is because he's basically trying to show that even though Keemstar says, oh, and he'll start saying it's a joke, Def Noodles is saying nobody thought this was a joke. So Def Noodles says, those who read and commented on the tweet clearly understood it as stating actual verifiable facts about plaintiff. For example, the next day on May 22nd, 2021, a user with the Twitter handle Memelin responded to the tweet and stated, showing them girls his little noodles. And then another user posts, so Def Noodles might be a pedophile. So those people clearly were taking this seriously and not as a joke. And then Def Noodles says he also received direct messages and tweets that were asking him to comment on the false allegations by Keemstar. And the people who were messaging him expressed that they understood the tweet to make the accusation that plaintiff was the subject of allegations of grooming underage girls for sex and was involved in pedophilia. And then you have this other Twitter person saying, hopefully MSM, that's the mainstream media, picks up on this. Can't have another pedo running around this platform. And then Def Noodles says that there were tweets calling for an official investigation and to believe the victims. And he says, but the truth was there was nothing to investigate and there were no victims, not even alleged ones. Plaintiff received hundreds of messages that were harassing, threatening, and even included death threats. No one perceived the tweet to be referring to a fictional character, but an actual person, plaintiff, who they believed was the subject of actual allegations of sexual crimes against minors. And even though the defendant knew this, he still allowed his lies to spread like wildfire around social media while remaining silent. And then this says that although Def Noodles tried to defend himself on his own accounts, his social media following was not as broad as Keemstar's. His efforts were not able to ameliorate, which means to kind of reduce, so basically to reduce the harm done by defendant's malicious disinformation campaign. And as such, plaintiff's reputation was injured per se because of the false accusations of criminal conduct. And what that per se means basically that there's certain types of things you can say about someone that are inherently are damaging to their reputation. And I think there's a few examples when you do tests like this, but one of them would be this exact type of accusation of sexual misconduct. Another one is alleging that someone has a disease that's sort of, particularly diseases that are transmitted sexually. Those are things that you can say about someone that are always going to be defamatory just on their own without having to show more context or anything. And that's why they call it per se. It's sort of Latin. And so it says he suffered a per se reputational injury. And then apparently that Keemstar realizes he's going to be sued for defamation. So Keemstar engaged in an ill-fated and thinly veiled attempt to peremptorily, which means just in advance get in front of it, argue that the tweet everyone understood as a legitimate report regarding plaintiffs' victims of sex crimes. And then this says, Def Noodles says, on February 5th, 2022, Keemstar tweeted a confession wherein he admitted that the tweet was a total fabrication. And they start calling this the, quote, confession. So this is a tweet from Keemstar that says, don't you remember he kept posting nonstop fake pedo stories on YouTubers? So I posted this tweet to mock him. In May 2021, everyone knows this is a joke, that I'm mocking him, but now he's taking it completely out of context, acting like it's a serious allegation. And then he says also, or he quotes this, the same day he retweets also, and then retweets this, Def Noodles has declined to give us a comment on these allegations made against him. And then so Def Noodles says in this lawsuit, so after seeing responses to the tweet that took the tweet seriously, Keemstar, nearly 8 months later, issued the confession claiming everyone knew it was a joke. but defendant knew that people did not read it as a joke, as evidenced by the responses to the tweet. It says Keemstar did nothing to clarify or correct the false statements in the tweet until many months later after the damage had been done. And in the confession tweet, Keemstar admits that the original tweet was of and concerning plaintiff Dennis Feitosa and not a fictional person, because the who's taking the false allegation seriously cannot be a fictional character. It is clearly plaintiff. Then it says, not only that, but in the confession, Keemstar doubles down on the false claim that Def Noodles had declined to comment to defendant on the false allegations. That's where he retweets again, no comment, which Def Noodles says left open the possibility that Keemstar's failure to address the joke allegations might mean perhaps there was a kernel of truth to the false allegations. And it says, although defendant's confession was a jailhouse lawyer attempt at immunizing himself from liability for defamation, in reality it constitutes conclusive evidence of his actual malice as to the truth of the tweet, along with the threatening messages defendant sent prior to the tweet. So now I'm suing you. And so you can see the first cause of action, which is the legal theory why suing, is something called libel per se. We just talked about actual malice, defamation. I want to give you all a brief explanation of what all these terms, what the differences in them is, because you hear them a lot. So when someone says slander, that is a statement that is defamatory, that injures your reputation, that is made orally. So if I'm talking right now and I say something bad about Def Noodles that is completely false that I made up, that would be slander. If I write it down in a tweet, it is libel, because libel is defamation that is written down and communicated to someone in writing. Defamation is like this overall category. So defamation it includes both libel and slander. It's defamation means like any tweet or any communication that hurts your reputation. So it can be both of them. It's like those are two sub different types of defamation. So they would call both of them defamatory, which just means it hurts the reputation. And then when we talk about libel per se, so libel again is in writing, and this is because that's a tweet. Libel per se means it's one of these sort of few things that is inherently such a bad thing to say about someone, which is that he's grooming these underage girls. That is so bad that what he's saying is it's so bad that it is inherently damaging to your reputation, no matter like what the context. If you're asserting that that's a fact. And and the other thing they talk about is actual malice. So actual malice is a sort of defense against defamation, which is it usually applies to like celebrities or famous people or stuff that's in like a public controversy. It's a heightened requirement that's designed to sort of protect your First Amendment rights. And this came up in the Fox News case, actually. It's a lot of why they had to do that big settlement. So actual malice means you have to like kind of know that the thing you're saying is false. And if you're a celebrity, if it's like in this case, it's sort of celebrities talking about each other. So he has to prove basically you weren't just sort of being like reckless, like you knew that there was a serious issue with this, that this wasn't true. You didn't have any reason. Like sometimes you might be commenting on something and think, well, like even if you're like maybe that's not necessarily actual malice. If you're just like I know that's false, that's actual malice. So Fox News had the problem that a lot of its news anchors were in private saying that the stuff we're saying is total nonsense, and so they had all these like text messages that kind of admitted they knew that the accusations about these voting machines or whatever were not true, and that really hurt them legally from a perspective of trying to win that lawsuit, which is why that settlement was so large. So now you see this cause of action. You can one other thing that I'll define for you is jailhouse lawyer. So you see he calls Def Noodles calls Keemstar a jailhouse lawyer. It's a phrase that kind of means that you're getting your legal advice from just some Yahoo. So they call him a jailhouse lawyer because in jail, like if you ever go to jail, hopefully none of y'all ever go to jail. And I have not been to jail, but I've seen it on enough TV shows and have been a lawyer long enough to know it's something that really happens, because I've done a lot of, in my past legal job for a couple years after law school, I worked for a judge doing legal opinions, and they were all appeals. And when people are in prison, they will sue people. They got a lot of time on their hands. And so there's a whole sort of network in prisons of people who think they're lawyers, but are not really lawyers. And they will kind of write things to the court that just are like off the wall from a legal perspective. You would call them jailhouse lawyers because they're in jail and they're trying to advise people like a lawyer, but they aren't and don't know what they're doing. So that's what he's accusing Keemstar of, is like not knowing the law and trying to just like wing it on his own. And this cause of action. So what is this here? This libel per se. It says that Keemstar made false statements of fact expressly and or impliedly. So express is like I literally say you did this impliedly means implying it but not saying it. And these are the same things that we saw earlier about sort of the allegations of grooming, and saying that there was actual victims who were going to come forward to talk about this, and that Def Noodles had declined to comment. And so this says that ordinary reasonable readers of the tweet understood the tweet to be stating these actual facts about plaintiff Dennis Feitosa and not any fictional character plaintiff allegedly created. The ordinary reasonable reader would not read these statements as rhetorical hyperbole or satire. Hyperbole just means sort of like exaggeration or over, like saying something that's clearly not true because it's so exaggerated. Then it says, defendant Keemstar, as evidenced by the prior threatening messages in the confession, intended the ordinary reasonable readers of the tweet to draw the above referenced conclusions, inferences, and impressions from the tweet. And he says that those are defamatory per se because they accuse plaintiff of the commission of a crime, which is a serious crime, very serious, and that Keemstar, again, didn't clarify or tell people it was a joke or whatever. And, it says that Keemstar's admitted that he did this, and he was trying to do this to, quote, mock Def Noodles over supposedly doing this to other people. And that by doing that, Def Noodles says that Keemstar admitted that he intended or endorsed the impression from the tweet to be drawn that plaintiff was accused of. This had actually happened, and this was actually true. And then this says 28 here, in this paragraph says that the reputational injury, which is like the damage to Def Noodles' reputation, is presumed. And presumed means you just assume there's injury, and then the question is how much damage is. And he says, my reputational injuries exceed $75,000. And that'll be sort of in the motions in the court decision above. That's a specific number that you will very commonly, like almost always, see in a federal court case. And the reason being that there is a law that lets people get into federal court instead of state court in certain situations where there are people from different states in the lawsuit on either side, but only if the amount that is being sued over is more than $75,000. So this doesn't mean that he's only seeking $75,000. What it means is he's trying to say, look, Your Honor, look, court, I should be in federal court, not state court, because this is like a bigger case. That's kind of part of like the idea behind that statute. At least, $75,000 used to be a lot more than it is now. This law was passed quite a while ago, and I don't think that number's gone up. So it used to have to be a lot bigger, but that's still the number. And so you will always see them say more than 75,000, but that number more than 75,000 could be 100 million, 200 million, whatever he wants, or whatever he could prove, I guess is the better way to put it. And that he also says, I'm going to show that he did this with actual knowledge that was false, and then that entitles me to exemplary/punitive damages. Exemplary just means punitive, make an example out of. And so those are the kind of damages where, let's say my injury was damaged for $1 million. That's what's called my actual damages. Punitive damages would be, okay, we're going to go beyond that million by a certain amount to punish you and to set an example out of you, essentially. That's literally why they do it, is to set an example out of somebody so that other people don't do it again and so that they don't do it again. And he says, give me this mental anguish damages, this damages for my sort of emotional pain, which you might suffer if you have a bunch of people threatening to kill you or whatever. Like, that's not unreasonable that he would have suffered some of that, or have people thinking that you did these sort of horrible things that are discussed here. So that is the original complaint. And now let's look at what happened next, which was that there was something called a motion to dismiss. So you see this often early in the lawsuit when a defendant will try to get rid of the lawsuit at the beginning before they get into what's called discovery. And Keemstar just lost that, which means whatever drama is happening behind the scenes, it's going to be out for all of us, or maybe not for all of us to see, but Def Noodles and his attorneys will get into whatever was happening behind the scenes to cause this. And some of that may... there's generally sort of a presumption that stuff should be public when it's going on in the court system. We may see a lot more drama about Keemstar and about what led to all this, or what was going on with Ethan Klein and how this alliance occurred. So let's look at why he tried to get this to dismiss, why the judge ruled that Def Noodles is not a cat. So here is Keemstar's motion to dismiss. So this is the first, just so you know, the first time we'll start to hear Keemstar's version of events, because he filed this. And again, this is what he's saying. We just saw what Def Noodles is saying. They both disagree. And I don't know what the facts are. So you can't say I have actual malice, because I literally have no idea what happened here. I'm just reporting on what they're saying about one another. Let's scroll down a little bit. They get to what's called a memorandum of law. Sometimes they have like this cover page, and then they put the legal arguments down in this separate section. You can see these are the attorneys for Daniel M. Keem, who is Keemstar. And he's out in Buffalo, New York. So he's kind of summarized the arguments that he's going to argue that this isn't going to be about Feitosa, that which is Def Noodles, that no one would reasonably think that it's real, essentially. And then we start getting into that $75,000, which basically is like, look, Judge, I didn't damage this guy's reputation for more than 75,000. So here's what Keemstar is saying. He's saying that Dennis Feitosa files this amended complaint against Daniel Keem, and you'll note that they're trying to use the real names. To them, it sort of benefits them to not use like Keemstar, because then people might start thinking, well, like who are you talking about when you say Keemstar? And you might like this. I will just say this is kind of my impression of it a little bit as to why the judge probably got it right. You start thinking like if someone says Keemstar, you're not thinking about anybody else. You're not thinking it's like a cartoon character. If someone uses someone's like YouTube name, even if it's not their real name, you're probably going to associate it with that person or Twitch name or whatever, like Amaranth or someone. Y'all probably know exactly who I'm talking about when I say Amaranth. If there's or just random other people, Ninja. If I say Ninja, like I'm betting a lot of y'all or PewDiePie, you probably know who I'm talking about. And so that's kind of the problem with making this argument, is that people do have these like little personas a little bit, but when you use those screen names, they are generally like I would understand it to be referring to the person. And the judge did rule, at least, that it gets past this. So they say that he files this lawsuit and he makes these allegations that we saw earlier. They say that that Dennis Feitosa, the tweet about him was not about him, because Keem's saying it's not about him. Keemstar says the subject tweet was of and concerning a fictional comedic character named Def Noodles, a separate YouTube and social media persona that Feitosa had created solely for entertainment and joking purposes. The Def Noodles character is known for its repeated disclaimers that everything about it is meant to be a joke, and for providing fake and satirical commentary about celebrities and other social media personalities. The character is a frequent jokester and critic of Keem. So I guess these guys have had a beef. Keemstar saying that this is more similar to something like Borat, where you might not associate it with the real person behind it. Then Keemstar says he wants to dismiss pursuant to these rules, 12b6 and 12b1. Those are rules that let you dismiss a case early on if you can show that there is no way to win the lawsuit, assuming all the facts to be true. So, like, judges will dismiss lawsuits if they look at what you say in your lawsuit and say, look, if every fact you say in there is true, you still can't win because of some legal reason. They don't wait till the end. They dismiss it early. And that's what Keemstar's trying to get it dismissed under those rules. They call it failure to state a claim. And the other one is lack of subject matter jurisdiction. That gets into this $75,000 thing. That's a subject matter jurisdiction means in federal court, courts only have jurisdiction over certain subject matters. Sometimes they are they're all based on different federal laws that were passed that say, look, a federal court can decide this kind of case. And this is we're going to be talking about later what that means in the context of this lawsuit. So this says that so basically he's complaining that there's this amended complaint. So there was an original complaint. Keemstar moved to dismiss that one. I'm not showing you that motion because it's all sort of like dead, right? Like when they file it, when you amend the complaint, then they're doing that to sort of address the motion that Keemstar made originally. And so now we're looking at like, this is the live complaint, is the one they call it live. The amended complaint is the one that is like operative, or is the one that is kind of still in the lawsuit, and the other one just kind of, it's like, okay, that one's gone. And Keemstar says the amended complaint implausibly glosses over numerous express admissions by the plaintiff, which is Def Noodles, regarding his separate cat character and persona, which evinces further how the subject tweet is not of and concerning the plaintiff, and still utterly fails to plausibly allege the requisite damages. That's the required damages. The reasons for dismissal are actually stronger now than before, is what Keemstar is saying. So he says, and then he says these same three things, basically, that get into this. And we'll just read the actual parts of it. So these are the facts that Keemstar is alleging are true. He says Dennis Feitosa is a comedian who created a fictitious comedic character named Def Noodles. Feitosa has admitted and explained in publicly available internet posts that, and this is a quote, Def Noodles is a show I created. It's a mix between The Soup and The Colbert Report, a satirical take on internet news commentary hosted by a cat in a Minecraft house. And they have we're going to have a little called a declaration that shows that post. And says, in a companion disclaimer post, Feitosa further explained that Def Noodles is a character meant to satirize some of the most deranged, toxic, and destructive aspects of internet culture, Def Noodles borrows from Twitter outrage, modern day commentary cynicism, excessive clickbait, trolling, buzzword hacking, cancel culture, and outright pandering to righteous indignation to reflect on the realities of contemporary social media interactions and media coverage. These opinions and thoughts expressed by Def Noodles are not a reflection of Dennis Feitosa's beliefs. So Keemstar trying to sort of flip back on him his own disclaimers, right? So Feitosa is saying like, look, I'm going to say some crazy stuff under the Def Noodles name, but that's not me. I'm just imitating all these people for fun. And Keemstar saying, well, okay, if that's not you, then I'm not talking about you. But the problem is, I think a lot of people may have actually thought that he was talking about him. So he says that Keemstar says in a March 4th, 2021 publicly available interview on Jesse David Fox's podcast, Feitosa noted that his Def Noodles character wears cat ears, eyeglasses without lenses, and UCLA t-shirts while broadcasting YouTube videos in a comedic voice against a Minecraft house cartoon-like backdrop. And they say that Feitosa described how the whole cat boy, cat guy, whatever persona came about, and that Def Noodles is a separate alter ego vehicle for doing a satirical commentary on internet news and things that are happening on social media. Feitosa joked about the Def Noodles character being mocked by competitors and others, saying they're attacking this character who's a fictional cat in a Minecraft house who just doesn't exist. So again, they're trying to use Def Noodles' past comments about this Def Noodles, or Feitosa's past comments about Def Noodles, suggesting it's like a fictional cat, right? He doesn't exist, and so how can you defame a cat who's in a Minecraft house? What Keemstar's arguing. And this says that when confronted during the podcast interview about Def Noodles' post saying that Def Noodles had reached out for comment to a social media personality concerning a story, Feitosa admitted the post was fake because the cat character is fake, and that comment was never sought from the personality. And it says Feitosa also admitted during the podcast that Def Noodles has made many other posts that are not real. It's all meant to be a joke. I am not a journalist. Then this says Feitosa just explained that the Def Noodles character seeks to sensationalize, dramatize, and criticize other YouTubers and social media influencers to create controversy that might attract more subscribers and social media followers, which is exactly what both these guys are doing now. Lawsuits are drama, and they are sort of attracting a lot of attention to themselves by doing this. This says that he's repeatedly disclaimed that everything that Def Noodles' character did and said was meant to be a joke, always satirical. This is supposed to be from Def Noodles. The glasses, the last thing I'll say because I don't want to lift the curtain like the wizard, it has no lenses. It's meant to be a funny joke too, LOL. Everything I do is meant to be a joke. This page is satirical, meaning it's not meant to be taken seriously. Tone is overly serious because it's meant to be satirical. I have a segment on my YouTube that accompanies the Twitter coverage titled Irrelevant News because none of this is meant to be important. Then in all caps, this page is satire, whether you get it or not. Everything I do is a joke. And then maybe you haven't followed me long enough, but literally everything I post is a joke. So those are all quotes from Feitosa about Def Noodles, which is part of Keemstar's argument. Look, no one would have thought I was talking about Dennis Feitosa. Then, see the next page here. So now Keemstar starts talking about himself. Defendant Daniel Keem is another YouTuber broadcasting under the name Keemstar. Keem was an early entrant in the emerging YouTube forum and provides commentary on the other YouTubers and social media influencers. Within this relatively small insular universe, comedians, entertainers, gamers, and influencers often post salacious and sometimes controversial mocking content about each other and others with the hope of generating reactions among those who follow them and getting more clicks, subscribers, and or followers. Basically, all the stuff we're doing is just one big professional wrestling thing where my drama is just sort of to get clicks. And which may be true with a lot of this. So, and then he says, in this case, Feitosa alleges that Keem defamed him based on a May 21st, 2021 tweet sent from Keem's Twitter account. And then there's this sort of tweet again making these accusations. Keemstar says the subject tweet does not reference Feitosa. It is to and about the Def Noodles character that routinely mocks, attacks, and jokes about other YouTubers using allegedly caveats and phrasing and fake sources. And importantly, it follows a part of a long-running volley of claimed satirical rants specifically posted by the Def Noodles character towards Keem. Indeed, in the 3 days leading up to Keem's posting the subject tweet, Def Noodles posted publicly available tweets accusing Keem of allegedly engaging in a variety of bad acts. So what Keemstar is saying is basically like, look, we had a beef. It was kind of a fake beef, maybe a pro wrestling type thing. This Def Noodles character is just saying stuff about me. This is the exact same thing. And this was a back and forth about the beef, doing the same thing. So these are supposed to be Def Noodles posts. That's what Keemstar is saying. This is May 2021. These Skype messages show two people discussing Keemstar allegedly having the 15-year-old girl get naked on stream as well as streamer Cupcake. Keemstar allegedly abusing his girlfriend in resurfaced video. Keemstar allegedly yells at his girlfriend. We hear screams and shouts, and the mic cuts out at one point. She later pleads with Keemstar, "Stop it, you psycho. This is messed up." Keemstar allegedly bullied an 8-year-old special needs child on Twitter, and when confronted about it, allegedly said if he didn't do it, then someone else would. And these are all, again, Keemstar is quoting these from, he says it's from Def Noodles. After Keem posted the subject tweet, the back and forth internet social media banner continued, with the Def Noodles character posting several additional tweets that were demeaning and personally offensive toward Keem. Secondhand embarrassment. Keemstar tries to leech off Aiden Ross by inserting himself into Aiden's beef with Ludwig and Soda Poppin'. Immediately gets destroyed by entire Twitch and gaming communities. David Dobrik exposed. Keemstar embarrasses himself. Cody Ko exposes Soulja Boy. Logan Paul slams Jake. New YouTube video. A lot of people going at each other, according to Def Noodles. Then meanwhile, Keemstar scammed fans with cryptocurrencies allegedly. Keemstar is a known liar. He is a blank apologist. He's an infamous racist and anti-Semite. Very scientific studies. Keemstar a scammer. 1.4% liar. 1.5% racist. 2.1% all of the above. 95%. And then Keemstar says this, along with prior posts by the character regarding sources reached out for comment fake messages, is the YouTube and social media context in which Keem and Def Noodles character were operating at the time of the subject tweet. So if this is true, I do not know. I don't know what posts were made by anybody or what people are saying or what was behind it. We'll look at, we're going to have this declaration. They're going to show us images of these, so I'll show you those in a minute. But one thing to flag that this opens up, that Def Noodles may have opened the door on himself, is that if this stuff is not true, he's sort of won but maybe lost, because the first thing I would do as a lawyer is do a counterclaim, for something like this. If there's no proof of this, or this is just, I don't know anything about any of this, but if this is not real, then that you can countersue, because Def Noodles has established, right, that now Keemstar is not, that's Keem. People would understand that to be Keem, because if you understand Def Noodles to be Feitosa, then you understand Keemstar to mean Keem, which means saying all this stuff would not be a joke. It would be you're done. So Pyrrhic victory is what they call that. That means you win, but you lose because you won, which is an ancient Greek old story about a guy named Pyrrhus who won a big victory, but he lost his entire army doing it. And so now we call bad victories like that Pyrrhic victories. So they do some of these legal standards. They get into, and now we get into what are the legal arguments? What is Keemstar arguing after he said these alleged facts? So the first argument is the Def Noodles is a cat, is the short way to put it. But really, it's, more accurately, Def Noodles is not a real person, and we all know that. And everybody knew that this was just me in a beef with this fake cat. So you can see they sort of assume California law, because Def Noodles, I guess, is from California. A libel, which is defamatory of the plaintiff without the necessity of explanatory matter, such as inducement, innuendo, or other fact, is said to be libel on its face. That's what we were talking about earlier with the sort of very serious accusations we all understand are bad. The elements of a defamation claim are and so elements, you see this list, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Whenever you have a legal claim, you have to checklist what are called the elements, which 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This uses the word "and," which means every one of these has to be met. If any of these are not true or not proven, the plaintiff does not win. So what does he have to show? A publication. That would be the Twitter post. That's a publication. It has to be false. So false would be he's not really going to have these people come forward and make these serious accusations against him, and they're not true. Defamatory, which means it injures your reputation. Unprivileged, which means, in the context of defamation, there's something called privilege, which can mean that there are certain situations where you have a right to talk about it because of things like the First Amendment. And that is kind of when there's celebrity beefs, there's a higher level of stuff. If you're talking about Congress or what someone did, what a politician did, it's almost impossible to sue for Donald Trump to sue Barack Obama or someone for defamation, because they have that privilege, that protection to be able to fight about each other in front of us, which, maybe part of why our political system's got so many angry beefs between people. But it is, on balance, it lets you have those political discussions and not worry about getting sued, which is sort of the the worst of the evils is having like a lawsuit every time you say something bad about Donald Trump or whoever. You just don't want that as a matter of policy because of how heated our political discussions tend to get. And so the fifth element is that whatever you said has to have a natural tendency to injure or cause special damage. That's damage kind of like your reputation. The defamatory statement must specifically refer to or be of and concerning the plaintiff. So this is what a legal requirement that it's not in the elements list, but it's sort of a separate requirement. And that's what Keemstar is trying to hang his hat on. So Keemstar says if the words are not of and concerning the plaintiff, then the plaintiff has no cause of action. It's a matter of law. As a matter of law means it doesn't matter what the facts are, you can't win. To satisfy the requirement, the plaintiff has the burden to plausibly plead and show that the statement expressly mentions him or refers to him by reasonable implication. He starts talking about some cases where, there's about this sort of like, does it have to be about me? He says, no, it's not. It's not. It's about the subject tweet is of and concerning a fictitious internet cat character, Def Noodles, which itself publishes tweets and comments about others and claims to exist solely as a comedic entertainment instrument for generating jokes and satirical commentary. Def Noodles is not synonymous with Feitosa, as Feitosa has repeatedly admitted, disclaimed, argued, and emphasized. Def Noodles is a separate, outlandish comedic character developed to satirically criticize and otherwise attack other social media personalities and to be mocked and attacked in response. So what Keemstar is kind of saying is, look, you made this Def Noodle specifically to get into nonsense beefs with people, and I just participated in the nonsense beef, and so what are you doing? I think Def Noodles will respond talking about these sort of private Twitter messages that made it look a little more like a real beef, but that's for their lawsuit to resolve what was true about that, because I actually have no idea about this Ethan Klein alliance or what they're talking about, or I think a lot of that's going on in private that we may not all know about. Then he sort of gets back to like, oh, he's on these podcasts. Feitosa's claiming he's not Def Noodles, and like he's got this weird like stuff that an exact like outfit he wears to be this character, and so it's completely not plausible that this would be about him or of and concerning him. Then they say the second, this is like a separate reason to dismiss the complaint. They say that the tweet is not like cannot be interpreted to imply that it is making a factual statement. So he's basically saying, look, everybody was going to know this was a joke. And so they start doing the law here, saying that it's a context-driven inquiry to decide this. You consider just sort of all the circumstances in which the statement was made and decide, could a reasonable fact finder, that means a jury, like could a jury conclude, sometimes it could be a judge, but in this case it would be a jury. Could a jury conclude that the contested statement implies an assertion of fact, or instead is like an opinion or a joke? You got to look at the broad context. You look at the tenor of the work, the subject of the statements, the setting, the format of the work. So what Keemstar is saying is like, you can't just look at this tweet. You got to look at this beef that we were having. You got to look at our whole public back and forth. You got to look at the fact that Def Noodles was saying this stuff about me. It was all a joke. I'm not sure it is all a joke. I will say that there are some other YouTubers like using Keemstar of doing kind of crypto scams and are clearly not joking. The truth of that, I don't know, but those accusations are being made, and that was one of the things that the Def Noodles character or person or whatever he is was saying. And so I for sure don't know about these other accusations that he was making some more serious ones. All that's going to be like part of what they argue back and forth when they get into this, because they are going like this. It's not for sure going to a jury yet, but it is going to discovery, which means they will be exchanging evidence. People will be getting deposed, which means giving sworn testimony under oath. There is going to be more back and forth on this. They'll get through a lot of the lawsuit because of this. Keemstar says, putting aside the fact that this was in response to a fictional, always a joke cat character that has his own unique Twitter handle identifier, not Feitosa, the context of the subject tweet demonstrates it's not actionable under this 3-part test, which is like looking at the context and all the stuff. So part of this context is look at the industry that we're in. So Keemstar saying we're YouTube personalities, we're social media influencers. What we do is clickbait you guys. Like what we like, the whole thing for being a YouTuber is like causing drama. That's I mean, if I'm sort of arguing what Keemstar is saying basically, but Keemstar is saying like, look, being a YouTuber is all about drama, and so they're in this larger war of words, and all the stuff we're posting is like mixtures of entertainment. And he says both of us, right? What we say is entertainment, news, satire, gossip, sophomoric insults. And I think a lot of the audience of these people is like kind of actually like very young audience. which does suggest that this is sophomoric, and that he's saying Def Noodles has basically said that's what I'm doing. He's admitted that in the past. Then he gets to the second part of this test. You consider sort of the narrow context. First, you consider the broad context. Then you consider like the actual content of the statement. Is this hyperbolic language, like exaggerated? Is it what is the audience going to expect? Like, what are they looking at in this specific statement? And he cites some court decisions that said that from California, saying overly vague statements and generalized comments lacking any specificity as to the time or place of alleged conduct are maybe a further signal to the reader that there's no factual basis. This is one, like an example that Keemstar citing of one case that said that when someone had alleged that a plaintiff picked up streetwalkers and homeless drug addicts and was a deadbeat dad, they could not sue under California law under that because of how general it was, which would be kind of helpful to Keemstar. Then he says, look, it's a 3-line tweet. It purports to be a report on an allegation made by a, quote, big YouTuber source. And he's saying, like, when I said that, I was mocking Def Noodles for making up these sources in his other tweets in the series. And the statement parrots the cautionary language allegedly, which is like Keemstar says is the kind of a signature disclaimer that Def Noodles uses, which some people think, oh, you say allegedly and now you're off the hook. That's not, I will say that's not, you can't just say allegedly and be off the hook. It does help a little, I guess, but if you just are constantly going like using this example above, like, oh, you allegedly picked up streetwalkers, you allegedly picked up homeless drug addicts, you allegedly were deadbeat dad, that doesn't really like we know when you're saying ha 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 allegedly that you're like, if you're saying it like that, that's part of the context is that you can kind of tell that he's not really like, it does not necessarily protect you. Now with Def Noodles, maybe it is like, on the other hand, part of being a lawyer is you argue back and forth. And so you can see me doing that a little bit. The Def Noodles sort of side of this in this case might say, look, allegedly is part of the joke, or Keemstar might say that. When you try to analyze these defamation cases, they do get into all this context, and so it is not ever like a clear line. Like sometimes it is, but most of the time, you have to look at like everything happening, what everything was saying to really kind of decide. And the judges said, look, the jury's going to decide all this, assuming that enough evidence comes forth. So Keemstar saying, like, I was mimicking him saying I reached out for comment because he's false about that. Now he did do it in private, so I'm not sure what that was for or about, if it's a sort of mimicking you. And he says, look, this is just like I'm parodying Def Noodles is essentially what he says, because he's basically saying the Def Noodles, quote, character, or that's my quote, not his, this character basically made the same kind of allegations about other people, and we're going to see some examples below in this declaration. And they got more about how he goes on these podcasts. He says it's a cat-like persona. It says, there's no specific accusations of something. There's no accusations of specific criminal conduct. I'm just making fun of his like fake stories. It's part of the beef. And this was part of a war, because he says it's part of a war of words with a cat in a Minecraft house character, an alter ego that was expressly created and existing to generate mocking comments in a satirical environment where literally everything was a joke. That is what Keemstar's kind of saying about this. And he said he's now using other examples of cases. And that's, if you're a lawyer, a lot of what you do is try to show, like, look, in this other lawsuit, here's what a judge did. In this other lawsuit, here's what a judge did. And so you find ones where the facts are kind of close to what's happening here. So he says, here's this other New York case where the defendant called the plaintiff a racist pedophile after the plaintiff, who was a disc jockey, made statements concerning the young daughter of a disc jockey on a rival station. He's saying, look, those disc jockeys were in a beef. It was a war of words and not an assertion of fact. And so, look, we're in a war of words too. Like, it's a fake YouTube beef. And then he kind of just keeps saying that, like, it's the influencer industry. It's what we do. That's how I make my money, is through fake beefs, which may be telling you something about Drama Alert if you think that's all real. Like, he is kind of saying that the motivation behind all that is like get clicks. And then here is the third and sort of last argument that Keemstar is making, at least in this motion, which is about that $75,000 thing. I'll just cover this real briefly, but all this law is something that if you're a YouTuber, you probably want to know this law. Like, especially if you start getting into these beefs, you may want to know like where, at least kind of where's the line about what I can say and what I can't. And so this is all about like how much damage is. You can see they're saying this is a jurisdictional amount. And so like that 75,000 is just for this thing called diversity. Diversity is you like let's make sure I can get back to where I am here. You can see this V, right? So you got a plaintiff, you got a defendant. Diversity means that this guy's from one state, and on this side you have like everyone from one state. You on this side everyone is from a different state. So there are like 5 people. You don't want one of them to be from New York. This Keem's from New York. Here it is: California, New York. Feitosa, California, Keem, New York. That means if the amount in controversy is what they call it is more than 75,000, you file it in federal court or can file it in federal court. Either party gets the choice. So if Feitosa had filed in state court, then Keem, if he had wanted to, could switch sides and be like, I do want to be in federal court. Like it's what's called removal. So the defendant in the state court can file this thing, pull it off to federal court, and then the federal court decides, hey, where should this be with me? Should it be with the state court? Whatever. So back to what he's arguing about that. Page 22. Okay. So he says, basically that Feitosa doesn't allege what he needs to get over $75,000. He does not allege any loss of income, any economic harm. He doesn't allege a loss of YouTube subscribers or social media followers. So the court should just dismiss it because like he shouldn't be in federal court. Says Feitosa adds these allegations about mental anguish in his amended complaint, but he doesn't say like what it is. And they're kind of firing a shot, like a warning shot to Feitosa right here. It's not actually like about this argument, but you can tell the lawyers put it in to like be like, hey, you know what you just did, which is while his new allegations put his mental health and medical history and all other business, financial, and personal issues causing him stress squarely at issue in this case if the amended complaint is not dismissed. So that is not anything about this current argument. It is telling Feitosa, look, hey buddy, if we go forward with this lawsuit in this discovery, I'm going to start asking you about your mental health. I'm going to try to get your medical history and your medical records. I'm going to try to get all your business stuff, anything that's drama in your life. Well, that all causes you stress. And so I'll start arguing, the stress was not caused by my Keemstar tweet. It was caused by all this other stuff. And now I'm just going to dig into your business, business, being used in the, all your dirt. And so Keemstar is kind of warning him, like, you're not going to like what I start asking about. Now, is this entirely true? I don't think so. Well, I don't know New York law that well on this. California law would say that, because I've done cases involving this, they would kind of make you, before you could actually get into all their mental health and medical records, the person would have to like specifically be talking about their treatment or using the treatment like they call it as a sword versus a shield. So you're using your treatment to prove your mental anguish. I know in New York, not just California, a person can testify to mental distress without, like, they don't need other evidence. It can just be you testifying to it. What they call garden variety mental distress. And there's certain amounts in New York that can be up to, I believe it's in the it's more than 100,000. It's in like 100,000 to 200,000 range. I've had cases that involve this issue under both states' laws before, so I'm a little bit familiar with it. And then Keemstar citing a case where like, this mental anguish only hit $5,000. I will say, like, there's actually a New York case that's pretty good that does a summary of like all the amounts of damages for these type of cases for this, what they call garden variety emotional distress. That means with no like expert testimony or anything. And he could get over this 75,000, I think. And he does lose, or Keemstar loses this issue. We'll look at that in a minute. But that part is mainly interesting because it's like he is telling, like, Keemstar saying you're going to get in a lot of drama, so I hope you're ready. And so I don't know, those of us who, if you're a Keemstar fan, you probably want to see drama, and so you may be supporting this lawsuit going as far as it can go, because you may see more. The further they go, the more chance you get a trial, and the more chance these guys. Frankly, in terms of damages, it may benefit both of them in their careers if they get to go to court. Then they get to be the new Gwyneth Paltrow or whoever. Like, I'm sure a Keemstar versus Def Noodles live stream court trial will attract a lot of viewers. And so, like, you kind of wonder sometimes if these guys, like, if they think about it, it might be worth the legal fees to literally just do it. but we'll see what they do. Then so this is sort of like, this is a lawyer like signing a declaration saying, here's all these screenshots and stuff that we were talking about. See if we'll just look at a few of these. See him, like, that's his YouTube thing. There's this podcast that they're saying, like, here's some Def Noodles tweets where you can see like he's basically making some allegations about Keemstar doing the same thing. that he's like saying this allegation that's very bad, about sort of abusive behavior by Keemstar towards his girlfriend. And again, I have no idea whether this is some kind of joke or whatever, but that is what he was posting on his thing, Def Noodles. Then here's like more like bullying stuff and or more. So you can see that there are kind of like a series. This has definitely been a beef. Whether what extent this is like injuring reputations or helping them or whatever, I don't know. They are like he's Def Noodles is very clearly going at Keemstar. Now he's accusing him of scamming his fans with crypto. Calls him a known liar, an anti-Semite, a racist, and says he Def Noodles is saying, "I've never invested in SafeMoon," which is what he's like, and I believe Keemstar's. Yeah, that's a whole nother thing. It's another video, and so he's got this, and he clearly does not like Keemstar, and then Keemstar decides to fire back with this tweet. That's the one we saw earlier in the lawsuit. These are kind of just more joke. This is a persona. See, we saw that earlier. All this stuff. This is an example of where Keemstar saying he does this as like a thing, like, oh, I reached out for comment. So he looks like he's, I don't know what he says. Somebody else he's starting a fake beef with or whatever. Or Nicocado Avocado. There's him like starting stuff with him. Hi, Nicocado. Hope you're well. Reaching out because I've been told you allegedly gave the compilation channel petty. He's saying he gave some other compilation channel 3 copyright strikes at once, which means the channel's going to deletion. So it looks like he's starting something with Nicocado Avocado. And these are other examples of like Def Noodles doing this reach out for something. YouTube, it looks like. And so apparently this is something that he does regularly, just, but Keemstar saying like, I was satirizing this. Here he is with Mark Zuckerberg doing this. Can you let me out of Facebook jail so I can go back to posting? I swear I'm not Russian media. I live in California. Thank you. And a lot of other, things where he's the clowns. He reached out to a Twitter account called Clowns. Joe Biden just called Donald Trump a clown. Can you comment? To China. He reached out to the government of China. I hope you're well. Did you eat Joe Biden's lunch? If so, can you tell me what he had for lunch? Fish and chips or just a good old burger? So those are clearly kind of like jokes. They're maybe a little funnier than Keemstar reaching out to Dr. Phil. Hi, Dr. Phil. Hope you're well. Bad Baby is returning to social media after going on hiatus. Do you have any recommendations for her? Did you send her back to the ranch without telling anyone? Can you comment? Shane Dawson. Hi, Noah. Hi, Noah. Hope you're well. Some of your fans are arguing about a few comments you made about dating minors. Can you comment? He's just sort of like, oh, he reached out to COVID for comment. You're making a comeback. It is kind of like, it does look like that is like a thing of his, but it's hard to tell. Yeah, reached out to who cares. Sort of all these people. And so that's the end of Keemstar's motion to dismiss. And then let's look at what was said by Def Noodles and why he won this motion. So this is the opposition to the motion to dismiss. That means what happens is basically the person, so in this case, I'll just use their names, Keemstar files the motion to dismiss, Def Noodles gets to respond with this opposition, and then Keemstar gets a reply, and then the court decides. That's generally the way it works. Some courts allow replies, but that's not as common. So here's the opposition, and here's what Def Noodles is arguing. He says the musician known by his stage name as The Weeknd is one of the most popular entertainers in the world. He's known to his over 16 million followers on Twitter by the name on his Twitter handle. Imagine if someone posted a hypothetical tweet under their stage name that read, "The Weeknd has allegedly groomed girls from 12 to 15. Source, victims are scared of him and wish to stay anonymous but may come forward soon. The Weeknd has declined to give us a comment on the allegations made against him." Even if this were posted by someone with the history and reputation of tabloid reporting, no one would read this hypothetical as anything other than a factual allegation that The Weeknd, whose real name is Abel Tesfaye, had engaged in criminal sexual misconduct that involved alleged victims. No one would believe the allegation was against a fictional character called The Weeknd, and that assumably, the ensuing defamation action would undoubtedly be rock solid. He says, then Def Noodles says, but in this case, the defendant, who Wikipedia describes as a controversial figure with a news show called Drama Alert, wants to pretend that by making these exact statements under his stage name about plaintiff is somehow immune from liability because he used plaintiff's stage name of Def Noodles and not his legal name of Dennis Feitosa in the defamatory tweet. This is not only not the law, but defies all common sense. Defendant would have the court believe he was engaging in some kind of public comedy skit with plaintiff. But neither plaintiff nor the millions of viewers of the defamatory tweet were in on the gag. And as a result, the tweet, which suggests actual defamatory facts about plaintiff, is defamatory per se, wherein reputational damages would be presumed, and mental anguish damages would also naturally flow to a sizable amount. This should be an easy call for the court. And so then he gets into his own facts, and we saw a lot of these facts sort of earlier. He's sort of summarizing what was in the complaint, so I won't really go through that part because it's basically just the same. He does that because the court may not read the complaint. It sounds a little weird, but courts have clerks. Sometimes they because these are filed 9 months apart. The court may read the complaint and then forget about it. So that's one way it could happen. The clerks could read the whole thing, but the judge only reads part of it because the judges have a lot of cases, so they rely on kind of younger lawyers to go help them, like 3 or 4 younger lawyers. Or they may. These motions come in over the course of a couple months. So they may read one motion, then forget. And, it's very easy to forget stuff over a few months. And so you kind of repeat yourself sometimes when you're doing these motions. So first thing he does is object to all the evidence being submitted, all that stuff we're just looking at. The reason he's doing that is because on these types of motions, the initial ones, the motions to dismiss, you're supposed to assume all the facts stated in the complaint are true. You're not supposed to go looking around for evidence. And so he's saying, look, that's for what's called a motion for summary judgment. That happens at the end of discovery before the trial. So he's saying you're trying to do the later kind of motion, but I haven't gotten to look into your stuff yet. So don't look at any of these tweets or stuff he was talking about, which generally is true. You're not supposed to be doing that. The idea is you get the court takes a first initial look. They do the discovery. Then after the discovery, you've got all the evidence, and so if the plaintiff has all the evidence and still can't win, then Keemstar could come back later and say, "Look, now you don't have enough to show this." So then he responds to Keemstar's first argument with kind of the stuff he was saying above about the weekend, right? He's citing a bunch of law, saying it's you, would people who know who the plaintiff is recognize that the plaintiff was the target of the defamation? They consider would the person's reading it in light of all the circumstances be able to understand that it refers to the person that's complaining, which means him. It says, even though a court may dismiss an action if a statement is incapable of referring to the plaintiff, the of and concerning question is typically for the jury. What he's saying is, Judge, you don't really even get to decide whether I'm a cat. You have to send that to the jury and they can figure it out. And right meow, you can't do anything about it. And then he says, where a publication explicitly identifies a person, as defendant's statements did with plaintiff, the of and concerning requirement is met. So he's basically saying that he clearly was talking about a person, which is me. And so you can't, it's got to be somebody. And it says that's true even where the plaintiff is not identified by a formal legal name, but rather by an alter ego or a representative. And then he cites some court cases where that happened. Then he says the defendant, Keemstar, is basically cherry picking postings over years and years. But Def Noodles is not a movie character or a cartoon character. And while what plaintiff might say as Def Noodles might be taken with a grain of salt because of the satirical nature of his show, what is said about him does not. Posts in response to the tweet show that people did in fact read the tweet as referring to the actual human being who is known as Def Noodles, plaintiff, and did not perceive defendant's tweet as a joke. So at a minimum, this is a jury question. So what he's saying is Judge, send this to the 12 people and let us argue it out. Then he says, look, Keemstar doesn't cite a single other lawsuit that says a person can't be defamed if they're referred to by a stage name, but there's tons of cases that say the opposite. And he cites some of these cases where other people were using fictional names. Pee Wee Herman is an example that he uses. Apparently there was a lawsuit. I'm not sure if there's a lawsuit, but he's using Pee Wee Herman. If you don't know who that guy is, Pee Wee Herman, he was, when I was a kid, I was watching his show, and then his show got canceled. It's actually my favorite show when I was probably 6 or something like that. They had a talking chair. They had a little genie head in a box and all this stuff. Pee Wee Herman was a guy in a suit who just would be weird. And then in the middle of his very successful show, he got arrested and charged with exposing himself in adult theater, and the show that I liked as a kid got canceled, and I had to have conversations with my parents about movie theaters and what was going on there and all that stuff. And so that's Pee Wee Herman, but it's a stage name, and the real guy behind it was Paul Rubens, and he's saying like, look, people knew who that was, right? They identified him as the same person. That's just an example. And so uh, uh, Def Noodles is arguing that stage names are like, you know who they are. Then he said, he responds to the next argument and says, look, it's not protected opinion to say that I am grooming a young girl. and which, that is a little, unless people like are 100% sure that's a joke, that is something that's like, that's a very serious thing to say. So he's kind of saying there is no context. There is no like, he's pointing to the platform of Twitter, but Twitter's like unmoderated. There's nobody like fact checking it. Or no, sorry. He says that Twitter is moderated and users get suspended for misleading information. And so, there's no like context about this that could make people think that this is not real or just a joke. And he says defendant doesn't cite any case law that holds that just because Def Noodles has this history of lampooning people and making jokes about them, that somehow people like looking at this would think that someone else talking about him is making a joke. Like basically like, just because I'm joking all the time and that's my thing doesn't mean that your thing as Keemstar is a joke. And he's saying kind of Keemstar purports to run like a news report. He runs drama alert. So people, that's kind of the argument I think that he's making or will make, is like, look, my character is this doofus. Your character is Keemstar is drama alert, the news reporter guy. So people think that drama, like something said by the news reporter guy is true. They don't think that that something said by the fictitious cat guy is true. So it can be different depending on who your character is. And then they say, look, why'd you wait a year if this was a joke? Why didn't you just say it was a joke? You knew everyone thought it wasn't one. Why? And he says, like, part of this feud was not just a public, professional wrestling thing. It was private. We were having our own stuff between each other. And he says that, like, you're not just calling me names. Like, you're literally saying real bad things about me. and you're accusing me of this crime, and it's very serious, and you have to deny this motion. And then they get into this amount in controversy, which is the $75,000. He cites some other cases, like where it says the court should just presume that I'm making a good faith representation of the amount of damages. 75,000 is like, he starts citing some of these other emotional distress cases from New York where it's more than 75,000, and then he's like, punitive damages would be even more than that anyway, and punitive damages can get like real high, so that's probably true. That's his opposition to this motion. So now let's look at the reply real quick, which will be a little shorter, and then what the judge said. Okay, so here is Keemstar's reply. So here, this is his live kind of last brief in the series of this argument. He is kind of responding to what Def Noodles said. So first he's like, "You're not The Weeknd. You're not like that. This is, you are somebody different, a different kind of fictitious or fictional character. That's not the same thing as a stage name, right? A stage name would be The Weeknd. He's saying you're more like Borat." So first thing they do is that argument about the evidence. Like, can you consider it on this motion? They're like, okay, you don't even say what you don't want the court to look at, and this is all for context. And he says courts regularly consider such evidence in deciding motions to dismiss for context. And one thing they can do, actually, if they want to, is to convert a motion to dismiss into a motion for summary judgment. So courts can do that. They can say, look, this evidence is sort of so definitive or decisive that I will decide this as like a final motion, not this preliminary one. And they can do something called taking judicial notice. Judicial notice is saying, like, so in deciding a motion, you have to decide it based on facts. Judicial notice is for facts that are like so obvious that they can't really be denied, or that nobody is really going to be able to dispute them. Sometimes that can be like judicial notice that a contract was signed if the parties don't deny it. Or it could be like, the United States is a country, right? No one can deny, or that California is a state or something like that. Or, Los Angeles is 15 miles from where someplace, I guess. Those are like facts where you can pick up like a book and or whatever, and it'll say it, and Wikipedia will say it, and no one's going to deny it. Or if they do, they're out of their gourd. And so he's basically saying, look at all these tweets. Don't ignore them. He keeps arguing essentially that Def Noodles is this fictional character, that he's this cat, and then says, like, you can't, like, it's not a stage name, it's a movie character, it's like a cartoon character. You're not like The Weeknd, you're George Costanza, where Jason Alexander plays George Costanza, which is this guy on Seinfeld. No one's going to think, no one would understand the comment that George Costanza is a neurotic, insecure liar to be of and concerning Jason Alexander. So he's kind of making a similar argument I was doing earlier about like this is not the same thing as a stage name or just a YouTube channel name or something. And then Keemstar says, cases you're talking about don't apply. He kind of tries to distinguish them. He says there's no like it's just very clear that this is this fake persona, and I'm talking about the cat guy. And then he goes to this kind of last part that we were talking about, which is or I guess not the last part, the second argument about the sort of look at the context. And he's saying, New York law requires looking at the context, even if we apply that. The broad context is this dispute. He's kind of really just repeating a lot of his arguments and saying, like, look, you do the same thing, right? Like, you are constantly accusing people of the exact same thing. That's because it's beef. That's because it's all about clicks. And he says, like, the same kind of stuff, like the cartoon cat character that you're playing, where everything's literally a joke, and you're in a Minecraft house. No one is going to think that you're doing anything other than a beef. That's kind of fake. And then he says, like, no, you don't meet the $75,000, and you're kind of just like making stuff up, and this can't really be that amount of damage. To me, that just kind of a matter of law is not that persuasive, because 75,000 is not a lot for like emotional damages or reputational damage or whatever. So that's his kind of Keemstar's last word. So what does the judge hold about the fictional cat? This is the judge's decision and order. So the judge has read all of these legal briefs and is now making a decision, sort of summarizing the facts. They usually give the background, and that's kind of like the judge will give you like this neutral thing of everything we just talked about. So he's quoting kind of parts that are key for people to know about. All the allegations. He's explaining, defining the word grooming. You kind of see some strange stuff in opinions when you have strange lawsuits. And I've been involved in many of those. Go look up a lawsuit called Cockygate, and you'll see my personal involvement in some strange lawsuits. And then this says that basically, like, the amended complaint says it's false, and here's kind of the facts, like all the facts we were talking about. Here's the tweets. He actually puts the tweets in this legal opinion. So now this is enshrined forever in federal law, essentially, not law, but I guess law. Now the court gets to, like, what am I going to do about all this stuff? So he says, first of all, let's address this $75,000 issue. And what does the judge say about that one? So the judge starts citing some law about this, like, 75,000 requirement for like how this diversity stuff works. The judge says, like, basically you assume that Def Noodles is kind of in good faith saying the amount of damages that are in controversy. You have to, like, it has to be like a certainty that he can't ever get that amount. And the judge says, look, he says it, right? So he says that he had the stuff. He said there was shame, threats of violence. He says he underwent mental health treatment. He had trouble sleeping. And basically the judge is just like, look, I have to assume that's true because he's saying it. And this is the kind of stuff that can lead to more than 75,000. So I'm keeping the case. Then he gets to this effort to sort of dismiss the case. He cites law on, like, how you use that, how you do these motions to dismiss. A lot of this is sort of just stuff. But first he decides, like, what law am I going to use? He says, because it's different states, people from different states, I got to decide, like, what state's defamation law applies. He says that Def Noodles says it's California law because he's a citizen of California, and Keemstar knew that he was a resident of California and the harm was in California. And then he says Keemstar assumes without conceding that California law applies. Thus, there is no present dispute regarding which law the court should apply. The court's just like, y'all did not dispute it, and so I'm going with California. And in any way, there's no difference between defamation law of California and New York, at least as to this stage. So on the issues we're talking about, the law is the same. It's basically like the same outcome happens under either state's law, so I don't care. This is the judge kind of protecting himself for an appeal. So judges have to, like, they'll put in stuff to be like, here's how I decide the case, so that an appellate court knows, like, yeah, I'm not doing just out there. And so now he goes to, like, okay, let's look at California law. And he starts citing a bunch of the stuff about how defamation works. It's all kind of a lot of the stuff we were looking at. And he basically says you have to, like, some of the stuff that's important is he's saying the defamatory character of language is measured according to the sense and meaning which such language may fairly be presumed to have conveyed to those to whom it was published. A defamation claim may be decided as a question of law if no reasonable reader or listener could have reasonably understood the statement in the alleged defamatory sense. It's kind of saying you got a pretty high standard. You got to prove that there's nobody who could think this, right? Which is different from just saying, oh, people kind of knew. So the court says, look, Def Noodles has stated a claim for defamation. He's said enough that if he wins these facts or convinces a jury, he can win. That doesn't mean he does win. It just means this is possible for him to win legally, so I'm not dismissing right now. And then he checks these elements. So that we were talking about that list of 5 things earlier. He says that Keemstar says he hasn't alleged that, or that the tweet was about him because of this Def Noodles persona. Keem submits statements by Feitosa that his character wears cat ears, lensless glasses, and UCLA shirts to create a whole like cat boy, cat guy, whatever persona. Keem submits evidence that Feitosa has stated that Def Noodles is a character who's a fictional cat who just doesn't exist. And this is a judge, finding that. The judge says, on a motion to dismiss, the court is limited to a consideration of the pleadings. Materials outside the pleadings are presented to the court. The court can choose to exclude them or treat the motion as one for summary judgment, which is what we said earlier. Court is going to choose to exclude it. So he's like, I'm not considering all this stuff Keem submitted. I'm looking at what the complaint says. And the complaint says, doesn't talk about that stuff. The complaint says that people knew that we were the same person, that the public does not distinguish us. And he gets back to Keemstar's arguments and says Keemstar says this is all this beef of influencers, and here's all these tweets, and it's a war of words and a beef. And the court says, look, again, I'm not looking at all this tweets and stuff. I'm looking at what the complaint says. That's all I look at is the wording of what was actually alleged by Def Noodles, and could it be true? If I assume it's true, do you win legally? That doesn't mean it is true. That means the judge says, for now, I'll pretend it's true, and then I'll let the jury decide later. And it says Keemstar doesn't point to any kind of complete news article or a broadcast that I can consult. He only has a selection of tweets. His submissions are much more than what a court usually looks at on certainly on a motion to dismiss. And the court says they risk depriving Feitosa of a fair adjudication by asking this court to consider an incomplete record. What the court is saying is, look, Keemstar has submitted these tweets, but I don't have everything on Twitter. I don't have all these stuff these guys are beefing about. I don't know what Ethan Klein's got to do with this. I don't know any of this. So I'm not going to decide right now, without getting a complete record, without doing discovery, who's right. I'm just going to look at what's alleged. I'm going to assume that everything alleged is true, and I'm going to look at if that is proven, is that enough to do defamation? And he says, look, if it's proven, if I assume all that to be true, a jury could theoretically hold that this was defamation, and so I am not dismissing it, and we are we're going forward. So what does all of this mean at the end of this for our future consumption of drama? So going forward, I would expect that we will see Keemstar filing a counterclaim. Certainly this tweets that it's kind of a if you would want to strategically do that. Okay, if you're Keemstar, you want to have that in your pocket because it sort of puts Def Noodles legally in a position where, by proving his own case, Def Noodles is essentially proving a case against himself for all the things he was saying about Keemstar, if they're not true. Now, the problem is, by putting that into issue, so that's the only downside to that is, let's say Keemstar does counterclaim. I think it probably, I don't know, I guess it is a tough call if you think about it. So the downside that Keemstar could face by doing that is now, let's just use the crypto thing as an example, the Safe Moon stuff or whatever. Second, Keemstar starts saying, oh, that's not true what you said about me. That's not true about me abusing my girlfriend. That's not true about this other stuff. Now, Def Noodles gets to go do discovery about that. Def Noodles could go take a deposition of Keemstar's girlfriend and be like, how did he treat you? That's the kind of stuff that happens here. Because you have to prove you've put into issue in the case whether a statement is true or not. And so the other flip side of that is that Keemstar can go do depositions about sort of distress that that Def Noodles is under, and he might be able to depose Ethan Klein. They might, if they're really in a sort of hatred of one another or beef or whatever, he might start asking Ethan Klein questions under oath. You could see just a giant YouTube war from this, and this really could kind of engulf a lot of people if you start thinking about how many tweets were being made, how much stuff was being said. These guys kind of are playing a game of chicken where the level of drama, like you thought Drama Alert had stuff on it, you could see some crazy stuff, and they are at each other's throats already. The type of stuff that could come out from this could be very interesting. And so we'll see. They proceed right now. What happens is that they will proceed to discovery. Um, they will start getting documents from each other, emails, private DMs, all that type of stuff. That is anything that's kind of relevant to what's being alleged. First, we have to see what Keemstar, it's called his answer. So his answer will be when he decides does he want to counterclaim, and then that discovery mostly will be in private for a while. But as we watch this lawsuit, we will see likely things sort of coming into the record. If they do a trial, we'll see it all. And so, like, what's going to happen from here? I don't know. A lot of times they settle because of all that risk. If these guys want to go to the end, they will get a lot of attention for themselves, although it may not be the kind of attention they want. But if Keemstar's right and they just want to be in the middle of drama, like, they're going to get it. So if you want more videos like this, hit the subscribe button, or you can hit one of the title cards for some other video that's probably got more analysis of something else that's equally or equal or lesser drama. So